Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Yap Sesh. The format of this video is going to be a little bit different than my typical HSR Yap Seshes. Any of you watching this who are consistent Honkai Star Rail players probably noticed that I'm like 2 entire versions behind. And while that is the case, I still wanted to take the time to talk about 3.8, or at least a very specific aspect of 3.8, the type of storytelling they went with, and whether or not it works in a gacha game format, just because I found it to be very interesting. I want you guys to understand just how close I was to skipping over talking about 3.8 in its entirety, just because of how late to the party I am. But again, 3.8's format was just so interesting to me in the sense of being able to talk about what makes or breaks a gacha story, so bear with me. First things first, this video will have spoilers in it sporadically. Unlike my normal Yap Seshes that are marked with a spoiler section, there's not going to be a specific point in this video where I mark it and say this is spoiler territory. So if you are worried about spoilers in any capacity, then I would click off the video. So 3.8 begins with the introduction of a new character, Constance, more commonly known as the Dahlia. She's aboard the Astral Express talking to the crew as if she's always been there. March 7th is even referring to her as Aunt Dahlia. Obviously, whatever Kool-Aid our friends have sipped was not offered to us because all the Trailblazer is confused. The Dahlia pulls us aside, introduces herself and whatnot, and begins to get into what is the main chunk of the story quest, her revealing to us memories of the Penacony story quest that we do not remember. She weaves us essentially the behind-the-scenes tale of what was going on with various characters throughout the quest. We get a lot of insight into Firefly, Robin, and a little bit of Sparkle as well. We also see a bit more of Black Swan and Acheron, and we learn that Constance was also present the entire time during the Penacony quest, we just do not remember her. Overall, I really enjoyed the format of this quest. I think that going back through a story from a different perspective is a really good way to show the player more information we missed and allow us to make connections to the original story without it feeling too much like the same story twice. The best example I can think of to compare it to would be Nier Automata. You play the first playthrough as 2B, the second playthrough as 9S, and it allows you to kind of see more without the story feeling overdone because it's essentially the same events. However, it is much more difficult to appreciate this kind of storytelling with the sheer amount of time that passed between the versions of the story, and therein lies my contemplative musings of the kind of storytelling that works for a gacha game. Obviously, with Hoyo games in particular, there is never going to be a one-size-fits-all answer to this question. The vast difference between players who play the game for the story versus those who play it for the characters versus those who play it for just the gameplay, not to mention the difference in the age demographic as well. A child or younger teenager who plays the games is not going to consume it in the same way that an adult with a job is. There's just too much of a disparity of how much time those two demographics are able to sink into the game. And this wide variety of player base also leads to there not really being a consistent way to tell the story that everyone will like. Still, I think that making the decision to have a retelling of a story holding important information an entire year after the ending of the original telling of the story to be a very interesting choice. On one hand, the benefits of it are the players who are very dedicated might feel the need to replay the original Penacony quest. Initially, I wanted to do that, but I just don't have that kind of time to invest into the game right now, as we can tell by the fact that I'm 2 versions behind. Because players might feel the need to replay the original quest, they effectively have people playing the game for longer, etc., etc. On the other hand, it can also be frustrating for some players like me who, during certain scenes, was unsure if the information I was receiving was just a rehash of what I already knew or new information. Now, I don't want this to come across as me saying I didn't enjoy 3.8 because that's not the case. As a whole, I found that despite the time between the quests, they made 3.8 as new player friendly as it could possibly be. Most of the information they showed through cutscenes was new, and anything that was being summarized was a cut still image of the Dahlia, like summarizing things. Again, it did remind me a lot of Nier Automata, funnily enough, more specifically the 9S portion of the game, where we replayed the game with fresh eyes. But again, the difference is I was able to play Nier Automata all the way through in relatively close sittings. I played the game both perspectives very close together, so I was able to appreciate the different perspectives to the fullest because I could still remember 2Bs enough to make the connections. Not as much the case with HSR. I do like that they've been trying different ways to tell the story. For example, with Amphoreus, they removed character quests in favor of longer story updates due to the story they were trying to tell. I actually personally had gripes with this because I appreciated having character quests, and I found that with Amphoreus, doing that kind of affected the pacing overall, but I do appreciate that they're trying to do different things based off the story they're trying to tell. In this filler version 3.8, they went for this retelling style. It would have been very easy for them to stick to the same format after the popularity of Belobog initially, but they're still shaking things up and seeing what sticks, which I think is important with games that are live service to always be evolving, even if they do get a negative response from the player base. The Trailblazer loses his memories of Penacony, the reason given being that Elio foresaw the destruction gazing at them too early on Amphoreus if they kept their memories, resulting in their death. As such, the Dahlia removed our memories, but also vowed she would give them back to us at some point. I guess this point is now. Despite all of this making sense in the context of the story, I think that memories being a plot point that can be utilized as much as the devs want kind of cheapens the effect of the narrative as a whole. Now, I initially thought the remembrance was the reason why they wanted to do Amphoreus first, especially with the introduction of the Dahlia, a character very much tied to the remembrance and with a lot of power over memories. This train of thought led me to one of the biggest reasons why I didn't enjoy this whole retelling format initially. That being, if there exist characters who can manipulate memories, as we have seen in both Amphoreus, which granted is a simulation, and Penacony, I now feel as though I cannot trust anything that happens to be the full story. It's kind of like a Persona game. Yeah, I could buy Penacony 5, but I'll be getting Penacony 5 Royal next year, so what's the point? And as I said, I feel like the result is potentially a cheapened narrative that I'm always going to question. I'm hoping that because we're moving into an entirely new path, they won't continuously use the memory erasure plot point. I do have the utmost faith in them to not overdo that. But yeah, I guess the overall point of this video is I'm curious whether or not you guys enjoyed the retelling format of the quests, and do you think it worked in the context of Honkai Star Rail being a gacha game with such a long amount of time between updates? I think they delivered it in the best possible way they could, having it be very player friendly even if it had been that full year since you played the Penacony quest, but I'm not sure if I'd like to see it utilized more than just this one time. Irregardless, I'm excited to start getting into 4.0 and seeing what new and exciting things the story has in store for us. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.